Today, I want to talk about an idea for how we run our tabletop role-playing games called pool table dungeon mastering. Now, I first got this idea from a TV show that I was watching and have since, when I came up with the idea of this topic for the show, I started watching the TV series again. And that is one of my all-time favorite TV shows called Deadwood. Deadwood is really interesting as a model for pool table dungeon mastering for a few reasons. One of the concepts about pool table dungeon mastering is constraint, that you don't have this wide open world where everything is going on. You have boundaries around the campaign that you're running. You know that it's focused either in a particular region or around a particular storyline, and you know what the boundaries of that region generally are, but you don't know what's going to happen inside that region. In the TV show Deadwood, the whole thing pretty much operates just in the town of Deadwood. They actually built this great big set, and pretty much everything in the show happens within that set. There are a few scenes that happen outside of the set, but generally speaking, the whole thing is operating inside this one big set. So CJ, a patron of Sly Flourish, asked the question, what specific sources do you use for inspiration on interconnected plot lines, twists, and tropes? One of the things I'm learning into are hooks that come with published adventures. Part of my job is working to make compelling reasons for the specific players at my table to engage the adventure, which includes the hook, but actually is much more than merely the hook, intertwined plot lines and such. And doing this in a way that's still very open as opposed to very linear adventure is both an art and a skill, and I'd love to learn about specific sources you mind for these type of interconnected plot lines, which in many ways are tropes, cliches, but that's okay. I'm not asking for random tables, but more like I steal from this person's books or I borrow from these movies. And he brought up like Dungeon Craft, Professor Dungeon Master. Dungeon Craft is a huge inspiration. I watch his remakes of Keep of the Borderlands. You'll know what I mean. He's really easy, brings these things to life. That said, I've learned is I can't do all the work. Players have to be willing to operate and engage and things like that. So this question brought up that idea, and I thought about it from Deadwood being that kind of inspiration. So there's three interesting things I want to say about Deadwood. One is that Deadwood is a really good example because the way Deadwood operates as a TV show is that there is one general region and then a bunch of characters. And you can think about each character as a ball on a pool table, right? One of the pool balls on the pool table. And each of them has sort of characteristics. Each of those characters has characteristics. Seth Bullock has a set of characteristics, and Al Swearingen has a set of characteristics. Dan Doherty has a set of characteristics. Hearst has a set of characteristics. And they all have different things that motivate them and drive them and interest them that they often just state outright, and sometimes will state to each other. There was a really fun interaction, I think it was in the Deadwood movie, where Al Swearingen is talking to Seth Bullock and says, has there ever been a situation that you did not just walk right directly into? Right? He said that to him because that's what Seth Bullock does. Seth Bullock walks right into a situation. There's a wonderful scene early on where a young girl is the only survivor of a massacre from a bunch of road agents, and the doctor is protecting her. And Seth Bullock, the hero of the show, comes to him and says, "Is she going to survive?" Because he wants to know if she was a witness to it so he can learn who did it. And the doctor says, I don't think she's going to survive, and I don't think she's ever going to talk again. And Calamity Jane talks to the doctor. He's like, why don't you trust him? He's a good guy. He says, guys like that are just as dangerous to her as the road agents who went after her in the first place. Let's say he goes out to find him and they find out that he now knows who they are because of her testimony. They're just as likely to kill her, and now she's in even more danger. So people like that are just as dangerous as the road agents that would actually do the murder. And that's an example of like the characteristics that these characters have and how those balls can smash together. And one of the wonderful things about this TV show is you don't have any idea where it's going. And guess what? Neither did David Milch, the writer and director of Deadwood, had no idea where this story was going to go. And David Milch has written lots of TV shows, but one of the ones he did that I watched when I was a kid and watched again recently was NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue is this old cop show set in New York City, and the dialogue was amazing. The writing was amazing. And you never really knew what direction it was going to go. And in some documentaries that I saw for NYPD Blue was that he did not always have the scripts written until the day that they were going to act. And there was this great scene where Jimmy Smits, one of the actors, is sitting there staring at his notes that he just got for a scene he has to play right then. And apparently drove him so bananas that many of the actors on NYPD Blue quit because they're like, I don't have a script. How am I supposed to do a show without a script? And the reason why is because David Milch didn't have a script. He's like, I don't know. I got to watch you guys act, and then I'll see what you're going to go. The same thing happened in Deadwood, but apparently they were ready for it because the actors said it was amazing how he would watch an interaction between two characters and then suddenly write a whole new element to the story and hand us that, and we'd have to go that direction. That's the idea of pool table dungeon mastering. But even then, there was one third thing that I thought was really funny, and I didn't, long after I've been talking about pool table dungeon mastering and long after I've been talking about Deadwood is a great example, I was watching the show, and here's a quote from the show. This is from E.B. Farnham after he had a meeting with Al Swearingen, and he was walking across the street back to his crappy hotel, and he says, no deceit too prolonged, no errand too demanding, no rebuke too vile. Al Swearingen's a cue, and Farnham is merely his billiard ball. And I was like, he's specifically had a character talk about pool table dungeon mastering, kind of, in his own show. And I didn't even hear that the first time that I thought of this idea of pool table dungeon mastering. So that cracks me up. So where are we with this? What do we do? Okay, Mike, that's great. You love Deadwood. Thank you for sharing all of your Deadwood analogies. How do we use that in our tabletop role-playing games? So the way you use it in your tabletop role-playing games is focusing on actors. And actors can be NPCs or they can be characters. And instead of worrying about what those plot lines are, as CJ mentions, he's worried. They're worried about all of the intertwined plot lines and such. Don't worry about the intertwined plot lines. You don't know what they're going to be. Instead, you look at each ball and you look at the characteristics that ball has. Who is that actor and what are their characteristics? How would they act given a certain situation? The more you can put yourself into the eyes of that actor, the easier it is for you to decide where that actor is going to go when they interact with something else or someone else. If a character says to them, so an example of a pool table thing is in my Wednesday game, the characters just crawled through the Crypt of the Betrothed, which is an ancient vampire crypt. They met two vampires down there. The vampires are blocking access to something that the characters need. Now, of course, the characters can just fight the vampires and try to kill them, but the vampires are really powerful. And if they try to fight them, there's a chance they could lose because they're a little low level for vampires, for full-on vampires. So instead, the vampires are like, I don't care about killing you. I just want to escape from this tomb and we're trapped here. If you let us out, we'll give you what you want. And the character's like, if we let two vampires out, this is going to be really bad. So then they're having these conversations. And at one point, one of the characters says, well, what if it's just one of you? And the queen, the vampire queen, looks over at the sire. The sire's like, what do you mean? And she moves faster than anybody can even see and goes over and kills her husband, kills the other vampire, and just murders him right in his seat, like tears his throat out and he's dead. And then she's now seated back in her seat faster than anybody could even see. He's dead. And she goes, will this help? Now it's just me. And I actually stole that scene directly out of Queen of the Damned, the movie Queen of the Damned, which I think came from the Anne Rice novel Queen of the Damned, where there was a king and queen, and the queen kills the king and goes out to be just the ruler on her own. So I was like, and it kind of makes sense for vampires. Like, it really makes vampires interesting because they're like, wait a minute, you guys were a couple for thousands of years. And then just based on this conversation, you just murdered him outright. And she's like, yeah, that's how things go. That was pool table DMing. I didn't know that was going to happen. I thought like maybe that's she would totally kill her husband. Like they would betray each other, but she's the smarter one. So she'd probably betray her husband if it meant getting free. That is pool table GMing. And then the players are all talking about like, what do we do? Do we let her out? And then they came up with the idea, what if we control her coffin? What if we say, yeah, you can come out, but we put the coffin in our home base and we're going to make sure that we have control over you so that if you do anything too vile, we can stop it. And she's like, that's acceptable, right? So there's this fun, like, I know what's in her mind. I know what she wants and desires. I know what she's willing to do. I don't have to know where it's going to go. I don't have to have any idea about where the plot is going to go. But I know I can jump into her shoes at any moment and say to myself, what would I do if I was her? And that's really that key about where is the ball going to go when it's struck by another ball. And that whole idea is you do that for all the NPCs. Who are all the villains? Who are all the NPCs? Who are the characters? And how are they all interacting? And how is the story evolving as these things collide? I don't have to know 3 steps out. I only have to know what's in the mind of any NPC at any given point and what happens when you hit them. When a character brings them something or talks to them, what path would they take given what the characters did? That's that idea of knowing the characteristics of an actor, and by actor I mean like an NPC or a villain or something like that, and thinking about how they'll react to the actions of the characters, which is done by the players. That to me is a far more effective way of running a really fun campaign that can go in lots of different directions. It's not the only thing. You still need adventure hooks. You still need interesting locations. You still need to have a general path that the characters are going to go so that the game is fun. But when you're talking about the interwoven plot lines that are going on in an adventure, instead of worrying about building a giant ass network chart with all kinds of flow charts and stuff connected, just think about the nodes. Who are the actors, and what's their motivation to do what they want, and then get in their heads and decide what are they going to do based on what the characters did. That's really the fundamental nature of pool table dungeon mastering. And if you have the ability to go watch the show Deadwood, first of all, I got to give a disclaimer. It is a super dark show, crazy. It has the best 4-letter language you will ever hear in any show. Tons of violence, tons of all the triggers. It's got pretty much all of them in there. So you want to be careful when you're watching that show to make sure that's the kind of show that you want to watch. And there's things that are uncomfortable in lots of different ways that I am uncomfortable with the show, but I still adore the show, and I still adore a lot of the stuff that's in the show. Didn't end particularly well, but the movie was good. So the movie kind of made the ending a little bit better. One of the problems with stories like this is sometimes the ending is often a hard part to come to, and that's a real tricky bit. We have a really good one as a DM of ending really free-flowing things like this, because we can just ask the players to write their own endings, and it almost works perfectly. So that's an advantage that we have. So that's pool table game mastering, and I hope you like that idea, and I hope that helps you answer some of these questions of like, how do you keep track of super detailed plot lines? The answer is you don't. Instead, you focus on those actors and the properties of those actors.